Clyde Baxter watched his giant horse pull a tree from the ground with the same ease most horses would pull a cart. But something was terribly wrong. Titan was a monster of an animal, a Clydesdale standing 17 hands high, weighing nearly 2,000 pounds of solid muscle. He wasn't just strong, he was a legend in 3 counties. Neighboring farmers would stop their work just to watch him, shaking their heads in a mix of awe and disbelief. The ancient oak had fallen 3 months ago, a victim of a nasty autumn storm. It blocked the only path to the south pasture, cutting Clyde off from his best grazing land. The trunk was as thick as a whiskey barrel, its roots buried deep in the earth like skeletal fingers, and Titan had just ripped it from the ground. Roots and all, with a single earth-shattering heave, the great tree came free. Dirt and rock sprayed into the air. Clyde should have felt a surge of pride. He should have been marveling at his horse, a creature that had just done the work of 3 men in less than a minute. Instead, his hands trembled on the lead rope, slick with a cold sweat, because Titan had done exactly what Clyde asked him to do. And that's what terrified him. The horse stood perfectly still now, his massive chest heaving. The rhythm of his breathing was off. It wasn't labored, not exactly. It wasn't pained. It was just different. Wrong in a way that made Clyde's stomach twist into a knot of ice. He'd known this horse for 12 years. He knew every twitch of Titan's ears, every snort, every shift of his colossal weight. And everything about Titan right now was screaming a single, impossible truth. A truth that would explain why the strongest horse in the valley had just pulled his last tree. But as Clyde stared, he saw it wasn't just the breathing. There was something else. Something caught in the freshly torn roots of the oak tree. It was dark and rectangular, covered in mud. A box. Titan hadn't just moved a tree. He had dug up a secret. Clyde's mind reeled. The tree, the horse's strange behavior. And now this. His heart hammered against his ribs. He dropped the lead rope, his boots sinking into the soft, disturbed earth as he took a tentative step forward. Titan didn't move. The horse just watched him, those dark, intelligent eyes seeming to hold a wisdom far beyond that of any animal. It was as if he knew, as if he'd been trying to show Clyde what lay hidden beneath the ancient oak. The box was old, made of metal, and rusted shut. It was heavy, heavier than it should have been. Clyde's fingers, calloused from years of farm work, fumbled at the latch. It wouldn't budge. He could feel the cold dread mixing with a burning curiosity. What was in this thing? Who had buried it here? And why? He looked back at Titan. The horse let out a low snort, a sound that seemed to say, "Keep going." Clyde ran back to the barn, his boots pounding against the hard-packed dirt. He returned with a crowbar, his hands shaking so badly he could barely get a grip. He wedged the tip into the seam of the box and pushed. The metal groaned in protest. He threw his weight into it, sweat beading on his forehead. With a sharp crack, the rusted lock gave way. The lid sprang open. Clyde stared down, his breath catching in his throat. It wasn't treasure. There was no gold, no old money. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like rotted velvet, was a single object, a silver locket tarnished with age. It was intricately carved with the image of a songbird. Clyde knew that locket. He had seen it only once, years ago, around the neck of Dora Langley's younger sister, Evelyn. Evelyn Granger, Virgil Granger's wife. The woman who had, according to Virgil, packed a bag one night 10 years ago and run off with a traveling salesman, never to be seen again. And right below the locket was a small leather-bound diary. His blood ran cold. This wasn't just a secret. This was a grave. Titan's breathing still hadn't returned to normal. That was the first thing Clyde registered as he backed away from the box, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. The horse's massive chest continued to rise and fall in that same strange rhythm, too heavy, too labored. Clyde had seen Titan pull a fully loaded logging wagon up a steep hill without breaking this kind of sweat. But now, after this one tree, the horse looked spent. He led Titan toward the water trough, his hands acting on instinct while his brain tried to process the impossible. He watched how the horse's powerful stride had become shorter, more deliberate, as if Titan was concentrating on the simple act of putting one hoof in front of the other. At the trough, Titan drank, but slowly, his dark eyes half closed. This wasn't the satisfied exhaustion of a job well done. This was something else. Clyde ran his hands over the horse's flanks, searching for any sign of injury. The harness hadn't left a mark. There were no cuts, no scrapes. Physically, Titan seemed fine, but something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. A feeling Clyde couldn't name, but felt in his bones. Titan finished drinking and lifted his head. His eyes met Clyde's, and for a split second, Clyde saw an expression he had never seen before on his horse. Gratitude. Why would his horse be grateful? The question echoed in Clyde's mind as he began to unbuckle the heavy leather harness. The straps felt like they were made of lead. Titan stood unnervingly still, patient as a statue. Normally, he'd be shifting his weight, nudging Clyde's hat, eager to be free. Not today. Today, he just stood there. When the last strap came loose, Clyde expected Titan to shake himself, a full-body shudder of relief. Instead, the horse took two slow, measured steps toward his favorite patch of shade by the barn, and he carefully, deliberately lowered himself to the ground. Clyde's heart stopped. In 12 years, he had never, not once, seen Titan lie down during the day. Never. He was a creature of habit, always resting on his feet, always ready. But now he was stretched out in the grass, his massive body finally at rest. His breathing was still too heavy, but his eyes held a look of profound peace, almost relief. Clyde knelt beside his friend, placing a trembling hand on the warm, powerful neck. Titan's eyes fluttered open, meeting his gaze one more time. And in that look, Clyde understood. The tree hadn't just been about clearing a path. The box hadn't been an accident. This entire morning, this final, impossible act of strength, it had all been a message. Titan knew he was dying, and he had used his last ounce of strength not just to work, but to show Clyde the truth, to point him toward a decade-old murder. The rest of the day passed in a haze of dread. Clyde left the locket and the diary in the rusted box, hiding it under a loose floorboard in his cabin. He couldn't bring himself to open the diary, not yet. He spent the hours sitting with Titan, watching the great horse rest in the grass. By evening, a cold realization had settled deep in his gut. He walked to the small wooden chest in his cabin and pulled out a letter. It was from Dr. Hayes, the veterinarian from the next county over, and it had arrived 3 weeks ago. Clyde had read it once, then buried it, refusing to face what it said. The letter was brief. Dr. Hayes had seen a troubling pattern in older draft horses in the region. Heart strain. The signs were subtle at first: increased breathing after exertion, longer recovery times, a reluctance to lie down, then finally an inability to stand for long. Clyde's hands shook as he reread the last paragraph. Once the condition progresses to the point where a horse chooses to rest during daylight hours, the prognosis is clear. They have weeks, perhaps a month at most. The kindest thing is to let them rest. He folded the letter and walked back outside. Titan was still lying there, his eyes alert, watching him approach. He made no move to get up, and the terrible pieces clicked into place. Titan had known. The intelligent animal had understood what was happening inside his own body long before Clyde was willing to see it. The careful movements, the strange hesitation, the look of resigned acceptance this morning. It was all a prelude. But if the letter was right, then Titan's timing was no coincidence. He had felt his time running out. He had chosen this day, this task, to perform his final act. He hadn't just moved the tree because Clyde asked. He moved it because he had to. He had to show Clyde what was buried beneath it before it was too late. Clyde knelt beside his horse, the cold weight of the locket pressing against his conscience. Titan's eyes met his with perfect, heartbreaking understanding. There would be no more work, no more shared labor, just grass and sunshine and this terrible secret that now lay between them. The tears came then, hot and silent. Clyde finally accepted what Titan had been trying to tell him all along. Their time was almost over, but Titan's last request had just begun. A new rhythm settled over the farm, a rhythm of waiting. Clyde's days were now measured by the rise and fall of Titan's great chest. He stopped planning work and started spending his hours simply sitting with his old friend, a silent vigil under the vast country sky. Titan seemed at peace. He grazed when he wanted, drank when he was thirsty, and rested when his massive body told him to. There was a profound dignity in his decline that tore at Clyde's heart. The neighbors noticed. Virgil Granger, a man whose farm bordered Clyde's to the east, stopped by one afternoon. He was a big man, with a face that always seemed set in a scowl. He saw Clyde brushing Titan's coat while the horse lay in the grass. "Horse seems to be taking it easy," Virgil said, his voice a low rumble. His eyes lingered on Titan for a moment too long. "He's earned it," Clyde replied, keeping his own voice steady, his hand never stopping its motion on Titan's copper coat. Virgil grunted. "That oak. Impressive he moved it. Must have taken a lot out of him." There was a question in his voice, a subtle probing that made the hair on Clyde's neck stand up. "He's the strongest horse in the valley," Clyde said simply. "Always has been." Virgil nodded slowly, his gaze shifting from the horse to the cleared path, then to the spot where the oak had been. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face before he turned and left, leaving Clyde with a fresh wave of unease. That night, Clyde couldn't sleep. He sat at his small kitchen table, the rusted metal box in front of him. The silver locket gleamed in the dim lantern light. He couldn't put it off any longer. With trembling fingers, he opened the leather-bound diary. The handwriting was small and neat. The entries dated a decade ago. It was Evelyn Granger's. He began to read. The first few pages were filled with the simple hopes and worries of a young farm wife. But then the tone began to shift. Evelyn wrote about Virgil's temper, about his jealousy, about the bruises she covered with long sleeves. She wrote about his controlling nature, how he'd taken her money, how he wouldn't let her visit her sister Dora. A cold dread crept up Clyde's spine. Then he reached the final entry. It was dated the night she supposedly disappeared. "He found out about the money I saved. He knows I want to leave. He's been drinking all day, watching me from the porch." The look in his eyes. "I've never seen him like this. I'm afraid. I buried this diary with my mother's locket under the old oak, the one place he never goes. If something happens to me, if I don't make it to Dora's, someone has to know the truth." Clyde slammed the diary shut, his heart pounding like a drum. It was a confession from the grave. Virgil hadn't just been a bad husband. He was a killer, and Titan had led him right to the evidence. The next morning, everything felt different. The bird song sounded like a warning. The wind rustling through the trees sounded like a whisper. Clyde watched Virgil working in his fields across the fence line, and all he could see was a monster hiding in plain sight. Titan was weaker today. He barely touched his food. Clyde brought him fresh water, his mind racing. What was he supposed to do? Go to the sheriff? A 10-year-old diary and a locket found by a horse? They'd think he was crazy. Virgil was a respected man in the community. He needed more. He needed proof. His eyes fell on the spot where the oak had been. The earth was still torn up. The diary said Evelyn had buried it, but her body had never been found. Clyde grabbed a shovel. He had to know. He started digging in the soft earth around the hole left by the roots. He dug for hours, the sun beating down on his back. His muscles ached, but he couldn't stop. He was digging for Evelyn. He was digging for Titan. And then his shovel struck something. It wasn't rock. It was a dull, thudding sound. He dropped to his knees, scraping away the dirt with his bare hands. He uncovered a piece of old rotting canvas. He pulled at it, and a collection of bones, small and delicate, tumbled into the light. Evelyn Granger had never left the farm. She had been under that tree the entire time. Clyde scrambled back, a cry catching in his throat. He had done it. He had found her. He had the proof. Now he could go to the sheriff. Now he could get justice for Evelyn. He looked over at Titan, resting in the shade. The horse lifted his head, a soft nicker escaping his lips. It was a sound of encouragement, of validation. "We did it," the sound seemed to say. But as Clyde gathered the bones, wrapping them carefully in the canvas, a cold thought struck him. Virgil had been watching him from his porch all morning, and now Virgil was walking toward the fence line. He wasn't hurrying. He was just walking, slow and deliberate, his hands empty. But the look on his face was anything but friendly. "Finding yourself a new hobby, Clyde?" Virgil called out, his voice carrying easily in the still air. He stopped at the fence, leaning against a post. His eyes weren't on Clyde. They were fixed on the canvas-wrapped bundle on the ground. "Just clearing some of these leftover roots," Clyde said, his voice strained. He stood up slowly, the shovel still in his hand. It felt flimsy, useless. Virgil's eyes finally met his. They were cold, flat, like stones at the bottom of a river. "Funny thing about roots, they can hide all sorts of things. Things people think are long forgotten." The unspoken threat hung between them, thick and suffocating. "Titan seems to be getting worse," Virgil said, changing the subject so abruptly it was like a slap. "An animal that big. It's a shame to see them go down. A real shame." He paused. "Sometimes the kindest thing is to put them out of their misery, a quick end, before the real suffering starts." Clyde's grip tightened on the shovel. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning, a threat aimed not at him, but at the one thing he had left to lose. "He's not suffering," Clyde said through gritted teeth. Virgil just smiled, a thin, cruel slash across his face. "Not yet." He turned and walked back to his house without another word. Clyde knew then that he had made a terrible mistake. He hadn't just uncovered a secret, he had cornered a predator. And now Virgil knew that he knew. The game had changed. This was no longer about finding justice in the future. It was about surviving the night. That evening, Clyde didn't sit with Titan. He barricaded the barn door, wedging a heavy iron beam against it. He brought Titan fresh water and hay inside, checking the latch on the small side door a dozen times. The horse seemed to sense his master's fear, his dark eyes following Clyde's every move. Clyde went back to his cabin and loaded his old hunting rifle. He sat in the dark, watching the fence line that separated his property from Virgil's. The moon was a sliver in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows across the fields. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He thought about the vet's letter again. The kindest thing is to let them rest. Had Virgil seen that letter? Had he somehow known about Titan's condition? It seemed too convenient. A dying horse unearths a decade-old secret. It was almost poetic. Or was it something else? A cold, terrifying thought began to form in Clyde's mind. What if Titan's condition wasn't natural? He pushed the thought away. It was too monstrous. Around midnight, he saw it, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper shadows of the trees near the fence line. A figure moving low and fast, heading directly for his barn. It was Virgil. Clyde's heart hammered against his ribs. He raised the rifle, his hands slick with sweat. He centered the sight on the moving shape. He could end this right now. One pull of the trigger. Justice for Evelyn. But he couldn't do it. He wasn't a killer. He watched as Virgil reached the side door of the barn, the one he couldn't barricade from the inside. Virgil produced a small pry bar and went to work on the lock. Clyde had to do something. He fired a shot into the air. The crack of the rifle echoed through the night. The figure at the barn door froze, then melted back into the darkness. Clyde waited, his body trembling, his ears straining for any sound. Silence. Had he scared him off? For a moment, he allowed himself to hope. Then he heard it, a faint, crackling sound, and he smelled it. Smoke. He raced outside. The back wall of the barn was on fire. The dry old wood was catching fast, flames licking up toward the hayloft. Virgil hadn't been trying to get in to hurt Titan. He was trying to burn him alive. "Titan!" Clyde screamed, fumbling with the heavy beam blocking the main door. He threw his shoulder against it, but it wouldn't budge. The smoke was getting thicker, pouring out from under the eaves. He could hear the horse inside, a sound of panic and terror that ripped through his soul. He had to get him out. He abandoned the main door and sprinted around to the side. The fire was spreading, the heat intense. He kicked at the small side door, the one Virgil had tried to pry open. The wood splintered. He kicked again, and the lock gave way. A wall of thick black smoke billowed out, forcing him back. He dropped to his hands and knees, the air cleaner near the ground, and crawled inside. The barn was an inferno. Flames were climbing the support beams, and burning hay rained down from the loft. Through the smoke, he could see Titan. The giant horse was backed into a corner, his eyes wide with terror, his massive body trembling. He was trapped. "Come on, boy!" Clyde yelled, his voice raw. This way! He scrambled to his feet, grabbing Titan's halter. He pulled, but the horse wouldn't move, paralyzed by fear. A burning beam crashed down from the ceiling, blocking their path to the door. They were trapped. The roof was about to collapse. This was it. And then, through the roaring flames and smoke, Titan did something Clyde had never seen before. He lifted his massive head, looked past Clyde, past the fire, and let out a defiant roar. He wasn't afraid anymore. He was angry. With a strength born of desperation, Titan surged forward, not toward the door. He charged directly at the burning wall of the barn. The sound was like a cannon shot. Titan's 2,000-pound frame smashed through the flaming planks and crumbling support beams, creating a gaping hole out into the cool night air. Splinters and embers flew everywhere. The horse stumbled, but kept his feet, clearing a path to safety. Clyde stared in disbelief for a second before scrambling through the hole after him. They collapsed onto the grass outside, gasping for air as the roof of the barn gave way behind them with a deafening crash, sending a shower of sparks into the sky. Titan had saved them. The dying horse, who could barely walk that morning, had just summoned the strength to smash through a wall of fire. As Clyde lay there, his lungs burning, he looked at Titan. The horse was singed, his beautiful copper coat blackened in places, but he was alive. And he was looking past Clyde, toward the darkness of the fields. That's when Clyde saw Virgil. He hadn't run far. He was standing by the fence line, watching them, his face illuminated by the fire. He was holding a can of gasoline, but that wasn't what made Clyde's blood run cold. Standing next to Virgil was another man, a man in a clean shirt and tidy trousers, a man who looked completely out of place at a midnight barn fire. It was Dr. Hayes, the veterinarian. The letter in Clyde's cabin wasn't a diagnosis. It was a lie, and the man who wrote it was standing right next to the murderer. Clyde's mind struggled to make sense of the scene before him. Dr. Hayes, the respected veterinarian, standing beside a killer in the dead of night, illuminated by the flames of the barn. It didn't compute. Virgil saw Clyde staring, and a slow, triumphant grin spread across his face. "You just don't know when to quit, do you, old man?" he shouted over the roar of the fire. Dr. Hayes stepped forward, a syringe in his hand. The needle glinted in the firelight. "It didn't have to be this way, Clyde," the vet said, his voice calm, clinical. "I told him the horse was a liability. An animal that's smart. It remembers things." The truth hit Clyde with the force of a physical blow. You poisoned him," Clyde whispered, his voice hoarse from the smoke. "Not poisoned," Dr. Hayes corrected him. "Medicated. A simple concoction to weaken the heart muscle over time. Make it look natural." Virgil was just worried the horse saw something that night, 10 years ago. "We thought it was just a precaution. We never imagined this." He gestured to the burning barn, the unearthed grave, the letter, the diagnosis of heart strain. It was all a cover-up, a slow, cruel murder plot against an animal whose only crime was being a witness. They weren't trying to put Titan out of his misery. They were trying to silence him. Rage, pure and hot, surged through Clyde, eclipsing his fear. He got to his feet, his body screaming in protest. "You won't get away with this!" Virgil laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "I think we will. A tragic accident. Old man Clyde and his horse trapped in a barn fire. The sheriff will find your bodies in the morning. Sad story. Case closed." He and Dr. Hayes started walking toward him, closing the distance. Virgil was holding a heavy wrench now, swinging it idly by his side. Clyde was out of options. His rifle was in the cabin. He was exhausted, injured, and facing two men, one of whom was a decade younger, rage-fueled killer. It was over. But then, something moved beside him. Titan, the great horse who should have been on the brink of death, who had just smashed through a burning building, took a step forward. He placed his massive body between Clyde and the two approaching men. He lowered his head and a deep, guttural growl rumbled in his chest, a sound more fitting for a wolf than a horse. His ears were pinned back, his eyes burning with a primal fury. This wasn't a dying animal. This was a protector. Virgil and Dr. Hayes stopped. They had been counting on a weak, dying horse. They weren't prepared for this. "Just get around it," Virgil snapped at the vet. "He can't stop both of us." But as Dr. Hayes tried to circle around, Titan moved with a speed that was terrifying. He swung his massive head, and the vet scrambled back, tripping and falling to the ground. The syringe flew from his hand, landing in the grass. Virgil roared in frustration and charged at Clyde. "I'll deal with you myself." He raised the wrench, but before he could bring it down, Titan reacted. The horse reared up on his hind legs, his body blotting out the stars, his front hooves transformed into deadly weapons. He let out a piercing shriek of pure rage. It was the cry of a king defending his territory, a warrior protecting his own. He came down, not on Virgil, but right in front of him. His two front hooves, each the size of a dinner plate, slammed into the earth with enough force to shake the ground. The earth cracked. Virgil was thrown off balance, stumbling backward, his eyes wide with terror. He had seen the power of this horse. He knew what those hooves could do. He dropped the wrench and ran. He scrambled over the fence and disappeared into the night. Dr. Hayes was already on his feet, sprinting in the opposite direction, a coward abandoning his accomplice. Clyde stood in stunned silence, watching them go. The fire crackled behind him. The adrenaline began to fade, and the full weight of what had just happened settled over him. He turned to his magnificent horse. Titan stood tall, his head high, watching the darkness where the men had vanished. He had faced down fire and killers to save the man who had been his partner for 12 years. Then the great horse swayed on his feet. A long, shuddering sigh escaped his lungs. He took one step toward Clyde, then another. His gait was slow, heavy. He reached his master and leaned his massive head against Clyde's shoulder. Clyde wrapped his arms around the horse's neck, burying his face in the singed mane. He could feel the great heart slowing, the labored breaths growing shallower. The poison, the fire, the fight. It had taken the last of his strength. "You did it, boy," Clyde whispered, tears streaming down his face, leaving clean tracks in the soot. "You saved me." Titan nuzzled him one last time, a soft, final gesture of love and loyalty. And then, with a quiet sigh, the strongest horse in 3 counties collapsed to the ground. The sound of sirens grew louder in the distance. Someone must have seen the fire. Help was coming, but it was too late. Clyde knelt in the grass, his hand on Titan's still warm neck, the rhythmic rise and fall of that great chest now just a memory. The fire cast a golden glow on them, a final, somber spotlight on the hero who lay at his master's feet. The sheriff arrived to a scene of devastation, a smoldering barn, a shallow grave, and an old man keeping vigil over his fallen friend. Clyde told him everything: the tree, the box, the diary, the bones. He told him about Virgil's threats, the fire, and the vet's confession. He pointed them to the locket and diary hidden under his floorboards. It was more than enough. They found Virgil Granger hiding in a deer blind 5 miles away. He confessed to everything, a torrent of angry, pathetic excuses. He'd killed Evelyn in a drunken rage 10 years ago and buried her under the oak, thinking she'd be forgotten forever. He'd noticed Titan's uncanny intelligence and worried the horse had seen something. He'd paid Dr. Hayes to slowly poison the animal, to make its death look natural. When Clyde started digging, he panicked. Dr. Hayes was picked up on a bus heading out of the state. He tried to deny it, but the syringe found in the grass and Virgil's confession sealed his fate. The justice Titan had fought so hard for had finally arrived. The days that followed were a blur for Clyde. Neighbors came by, their faces a mixture of shock and sympathy. Dora Langley, Evelyn's sister, came and wept with him, not just for her lost sibling, but for the noble animal that had brought the truth to light. They stood together by Titan's grave, which Clyde had dug in the meadow, right next to the cleared path. Clyde never rebuilt the barn. He managed the farm on his own, his pace slower, his world quieter. The silence was the hardest part, the absence of that soft nicker in the morning, the lack of that massive, comforting presence at his side. But he was not filled with sorrow. He was filled with a fierce, burning pride. He would often walk the path to the south pasture, the path Titan had cleared with his dying breath. He'd look at the spot where the great oak had stood, and he'd remember. He remembered the power, the loyalty, the incredible heart of his friend. Titan's final act wasn't just about moving a tree. It wasn't just about unearthing a crime. It was a gift. It was the horse's way of ensuring their story didn't end with sickness and decline, but with courage and with justice. It was a final, magnificent display of the bond they shared, a bond that proved to be stronger than poison, stronger than fire, and stronger even than death itself. Clyde never got another horse. There could never be another Titan. If you were moved by this story of incredible loyalty, click the video on your screen to see another unforgettable tale where the bond between man and animal defies all expectations. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Your support helps us bring these incredible narratives to light.